Well, let's bring you further analysis on the NATO summit and all its permutations. We go live now to our U.S. correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who joins us from New York. Sherwin, good evening. Well, the big news today is that Turkey has removed its hold on Sweden's effort to join the alliance. Ukraine's bid to join NATO has again hit roadblocks that are frustrating that country's president, Volodymyr Zelensky.
Iman, just on the first part, right, I don't think we've really come to understand the full set of concessions that perhaps have been made here for this about turn that we see from Turkey and President Erdogan, because hours just before that decision of allowing Sweden's accession to NATO to proceed, he was, of course, calling for the European Union to restart negotiations on Turkey's membership to that multilateral organization. So we don't know the extent to which that might be happening. That said, of course, the big issue here is President Volodymyr Zelensky, who is in Vilnius, Lithuania, for that NATO summit, taking to Twitter to criticize the NATO summit communique, Iman, that refers to extending an invitation to Ukraine to join the alliance when, quote, the allies agree and the conditions are met. Zelensky then took to Twitter saying he was in Vilnius and he says that Ukraine will be represented there because this is about respect, but Ukraine also deserves respect, the president of Ukraine writes. Now on my way to Vilnius, we received signals that certain wording is being discussed without Ukraine. And I would like to emphasize that this wording is about the invitation to become a NATO member, not about Ukraine's membership. It's unprecedented and absurd when the time frame is not set neither for the invitation nor for Ukraine's membership. He continues, while at the same time vague wording about conditions is added even for inviting Ukraine. It seems there is no readiness neither to invite Ukraine to NATO nor to make it a member of the alliance. Some context here, Iman. Ukraine was first promised NATO membership as far back as 2008. And so we are seeing an increased frustration from the Ukrainians, despite the fact that they arrive in Vilnius with hand in cap, essentially, for support in terms of the military alliance here, supporting their efforts against Russia's invasion in their country, hand in cap in hand, but also very critical of the time frame that is not forthcoming here in terms of Ukraine joining the alliance. I will also refer to what Jens Stoltenberg said, the NATO Secretary General. He said, the invitation per se would streamline the accession process for Ukraine and make Ukraine's membership reliant only on what he calls a political decision, similar, I think, to what you saw in terms of Turkey allowing Sweden's accession to proceed. President Biden, before departing the United States for Lithuania, said it was premature to begin Ukraine's process of membership, citing the lack of unanimity within the NATO alliance, and also the fact that Ukraine is currently engaged in a war with Russia, and membership right now would trigger Article 5 of the Charter of NATO, which essentially says a strike on one is a strike on all. So it would be premature, certainly from one understands some of the NATO members, for Ukraine to join now, because that would then involve them more directly in this conflict with Russia.
Well, let's pivot, let's perambulate around that point and talk about which bring in some of the other key issues for the summit. You mentioned Stoltenberg, that's the NATO Secretary General, talking about the need to demonstrate unity on the Ukraine issue, in addition to decisions that would reinforce what he called deterrence and defense. Now, on these 2 points, what is he specifically referring to?
Let me start with the deterrence and defense part. He is referring to the minimum requirement of NATO members to spend at least 2%, a minimum amount of 2% of their GDP on defense spending. We understand that only about 11 countries of the current 31 member alliance, which now includes Finland, of course, is spending that amount of money. So you need all 30 NATO members to be spending at least 2% of their GDP on defense. To the issue of unity, right? The issue of unity of purpose relates to support for Ukraine. I'm going to give you a figure, Iman. $165 billion has been spent by North American and European allies in support of Ukraine's financial, humanitarian and military needs since this Russian war kicked off on February 24th last year. That's more than a third of South Africa's GDP. So the question is, how much longer can these allies, these NATO allies, spend that amount of money on a war that they are not directly involved in, right? And so the question then, it begs the question, where do we find a political off-ramp? To the point of unity, the question of the United States, of course, providing cluster bombs, cluster munitions to Ukraine, that announcement coming out of Washington last week. You will know that a number of NATO allies, including the likes of Germany, France, Canada, the United Kingdom, are party to what is called the Convention on Cluster Munitions. Essentially, it's a global treaty that prevents or prohibits the production or use of these cluster bombs. Do you understand? I'm sure many people don't quite understand what a cluster bomb is. Essentially, it's a weapon, it's a bomb that detonates and then sends additional bomblets, or think in the vein of a hand grenade, over a wide area of impact. And so when you talk about precision strikes in the military context, a cluster bomb does not give you that advantage. And so what is becoming clearer now is, in terms of certainly the United States position, is that Ukraine's strategic military advantage on the battlefield seems now to be outweighing the moral and ethical decisions that some of these NATO allies have made in terms of not using these weapons, Iman.
Thank you very much, Sherwin Bryce-Pease. You touched there on that political off-ramp and what it looks like. That is the question that hangs in the air because, will it come when it seems, as you've just shared with us now, there seems to be a further ramping up of military support and less of the diplomatic action that is needed to bring us to a cessation of the war. Thank you for sharing the very latest on this meeting, the NATO summit, and all the developments there. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, our SABC News correspondent, joining us from New York.